So I think we will get started. Welcome to the, thank you. Welcome to this legislative update, Minnesota legislative update. I'm Mary Tintis. I'm with the League of Women Voters of the Red River Valley. We have a presence on both sides of the river, Fargo and Moorhead. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization, and we encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influence public policy through education and advocacy. Just a little bit about the League. If you're interested in joining the League, we welcome men and women as members. This brochure in the back or up here, please take one. Some of the exciting things we have going on this year and next year will be around the 100th anniversary of the women's suffrage movement, the right to vote. And also we have our First Friday public meetings where we have local interest topics. They're every Friday, First Friday, at the Sons of Norway from September through May. Let me get that right. So the one in next month is our last for the season. So what I'm going to do tonight, we're going to go for about an hour. I'm going to ask each of our legislators to have some opening remarks, tell you a little bit about what they are working on, and then you have your questions, raise them up, and we'll take turns answering them. And we'll start with Representative Paul Marquardt, then go to Senator Ken Deacon, then Ben Lean, and we'll just rotate as it works. So thank you, gentlemen. Welcome, and Representative Marquardt, you start.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this tonight. We're on a bit of a break for about a week, and then we go back and kind of hit the final stretch of the session. And so this is really a budget year, and we're going to pass a budget over it's a two-year biennium of $47 to $49 billion. And we're kind of to the point right now where the bills are basically coming out of committee and going to the House floor, and then we'll start meeting with the Senate and the House and going into conference committee. But the big issue certainly is going to be what are we going to invest things on? And when the February forecast came out, and the February forecast is when our economic advisors kind of look at things and what type of an economy we're going to have, because our revenues depend totally on that. When you've got income tax and sales tax and the corporate tax comprising the bulk of your budget, how your economy is doing really impacts that. And what it shows is that even though we have a surplus of $1 billion into this two-year budget cycle, half of that being one-time funding, which means only half of it can be ongoing. But the real problem is into the next biennium, we have a deficit, which means if you're going to raise even $1 or spend $1 of ongoing funding, like for education or nursing homes or whatever that local government aid, you've got to find some revenues into the next biennium or you don't have the dollars to do that. So that's going to be important. In the tax area, we're looking at tax conformity. Also looking at getting local government aid, county program aid out to cities and counties. And then, of course, always the big portion of the budget and the number one priority has always been in Minnesota, education. That's 41% of the budget. And so that's an area that we'll be looking at. And then another big area of expense is health and human services, primarily nursing homes, with all of us baby boomers getting near retirement and retiring, you have those pressures. So it's kind of with limited resources, how do we really set priorities and move forward? So I'm confident in the end we will get there between the House and the Senate. We are the only divided state legislature in the nation where you've got one body that's Democrat and one body that's the Republican. And so I think we should try to set a good example and show the rest of the nation that a divided government can work and can get results. So thanks for the invite to be here, and I will pass it on.
Okay. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mary. And yeah, I agree with Representative Marquardt about the need to set an example. And I do think that our leaders are kind of on the same page in that regard, that they all want Minnesota to be an example to the rest of the country, whether you're talking about the leadership in the Senate or the House or the governor. They've all been striking the right tone, which gives me, some optimism, cautiously optimistic that we're going to see a compromise reached at the end of session before there's any kind of a shutdown, and I don't think that we'll reach that point. That's the real hard deadline. Now, will we end by May 20th or the constitutional deadline? I'm not sure. We've had a lot of special sessions in the past. Special sessions aren't so special anymore. And especially when you have a divided government, there's going to be some significant differences between the bills. Those finance bills and the tax bill is going to be coming out. So there's going to be a lot of work to do to bridge the divide. But I think that it can be done and that it will be done. And I don't think it's a bad thing to have a divided government. If we can reach compromise, it usually results in longer lasting solutions. Solutions that stand the test of time. I think of Minnesota Care, for example, which did have bipartisan support, and I think that's what it takes to have a successful program and successful policies moving forward, because both sides have buy-in. So, and I think that's important. And I mentioned that there's some significant differences in education, for instance. On the formula, the Senate is coming out with a 0.5% increase each of the next 2 years, whereas in the House, they're doing a 3% and a 2% increase over the next 2 years. So a significant difference there. And I think it's important to note that inflationary costs have gone up by over 2%. So a 0.5% increase is an effective cut for our schools. So again, we're going to have to bridge divides like that. There's significant differences in the area of broadband. The House does come in with a bill that's going to fully fund border-to-border broadband to finally get all of our rural communities hooked up, both the underserved and unserved. It's going to be taking $35 million a year for a few years to get that completed. That's about as much as we can use in a year. It's about that $35 million, and that's exactly what the House has come in at, the governor as well, $35 million for each of the next 2 years. The Senate is coming in at only $15 million a year, so we're looking at just $30 million over the next 2 years. Again, a significant gap there that's going to have to be overcome. I can think of a number of other issues. Transportation, another area where, again, the House is going to be making significantly more investments in roads and bridges, which is an area that we've been falling behind in significantly. So, but again, I think that we will find some compromise in the end. And property taxes is another issue that I have a special concern with because they hit us especially hard out here in greater Minnesota. So policies like local government aid, county program aid, and again, funding for our schools ensures that we keep our property taxes in check and try to keep them down. And one area that we're working on, Representative Marquardt and I have put in bills to actually remove the tax on farmland for bond issues. That probably won't happen. Well, I know it's not going to happen. It's just too much all at once, so we're kind of doing it in steps. We got 40% tax credit for farmland on bond issues the last time around, and we're going to be trying to get it up to 70% this time. I do think that we'll get some movement on that front. The question is how much. But I'm looking forward to your questions. One other issue that we've been working on is the issue of elder abuse, exploitation, and neglect in long-term care. There are bills moving forward to address those issues on the regulatory front. One of the things that we're looking at is licensure for assisted living. We're the only state in the country that doesn't have a single license for assisted living facilities, and it makes it difficult, if not very difficult, to monitor and regulate the quality of care in those facilities. So we're looking at that, but I also think it's important to note that oftentimes we seem to focus on the regulatory solutions when the bigger solution really is making sure the resources are there to have adequate staffing and good quality staff in long-term care facilities so that we don't end up with these situations in the first place. We need to move upstream and deal with the problems on the front end rather than trying to deal with them after the fact on the back end. So those are some of the issues we're dealing with. We've got a multitude of different issues. So one of the reasons we're here, we do want to hear from you. This is when the rubber really hits the road, when we start putting these bills together. And they're coming to the floor now for discussion and amendment. So this is the time that we want to hear from our constituents and get your input. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting this on. You do an outstanding job for our communities by doing this. It's vitally important that we have this opportunity to connect with our constituents. So thank you.
Thank you. Representative Ben Lean.
Thank you, Mary. And I agree what Senator Eakin says. The League has always, I think, done a really good job at just encouraging engagement in the community around public policy and really getting people to participate in events like this where, you know, we can tell you what's going on, but more than that, we want to hear from you what your questions are and everything. So I appreciate that and certainly appreciate the Rourke. We've had these events over at the Moorhead Public Library the last couple of years, and so this is a nice new setting, very, very beautiful setting. You know, I think Representative Marquardt and Senator Eakin summed things up pretty well as far as where we are with the big budget bills now getting out of committee onto the House and Senate floor. And I do have to, you know, give credit where it's due, and I really appreciate the job that Speaker Hortman has been doing in the House, just in terms of really doing what she can to make sure that we can finish on time, that we don't have any special sessions. I knock on wood that we won't have any just because the House and Senate are so far apart. But I appreciate the job she's doing, really wanting to get these bills off the House floor, set up for conference committee as early as possible, and reaching out to Senator Gazelka to invite him into the conversations early on, just as far as setting joint numbers, joint targets between the House and the Senate. So. You know, I'm always going to hope for the best that we can finish on time and finish with a good budget that's going to help Minnesota. As Representative Marquardt says, we are looking at some budget deficits into the future, so I think it's really crucial that any spending we do this biennium is going towards helping to grow the economy. So things like higher education and job training, things like broadband development. I know the governor has come out with a new proposal at DEED to set up sort of a one-stop shop for entrepreneurs. So I think that's, you know, the type of steps that we really need to take. And, you know, I think at the end of the day, this session is going to come down to taxes and healthcare and transportation, just the overall tax bill, setting up, you know, what sort of spending we can do in this next biennium. But then with healthcare, the conversation around the provider tax, which goes to fund the Healthcare Access Fund, which helps out Minnesota Care, and some healthcare reimbursements. That's going to be a big part of this next budget cycle. Without that provider tax there, that's about $680, $690 million that the state would have to find otherwise to fund these healthcare programs. So that's a big deal. And then also the transportation piece. You know, I commend Governor Walz for coming out strong on transportation at 20 cents a gallon for new road and bridge funding. You know, I'm sure there's going to be some compromise at the end of the day there, but I just appreciate him being serious about it and really going out and setting the tone and forcing people to have the conversation about this, because we're going to have about $6 billion at least over the next 10 years for new road and bridge maintenance. That's not even new construction, just the maintenance of our existing infrastructure. So we have to be serious about that. So I look forward to your questions here, and thank you all for coming tonight.
Thank you, gentlemen. I have a few questions here, but again, I want to encourage all of you, if you have questions, write them down and hold your card up so they can be collected and brought up here. I do have a question here that I think we hear a great deal about the rising cost of housing, not just in Minnesota, of course, but certainly we've heard about that a lot. So this particular question is wondering what's happening with, as it pertains to low-income housing and affordable housing for Minnesotans. We'll start with Senator Eakin.
Okay, well, thank you. And this is a critically important issue for greater Minnesota communities and it's not just an issue for those looking for the housing, but also for the businesses that depend on workers that are having troubles attracting the workers necessary for their businesses. And the way that we've traditionally worked with housing is to provide grants, grant programs, and that's typically done through the bonding bill. Now, we don't have a bonding bill put together in the Senate yet. The House does have a pretty robust bonding bill. This typically isn't the year that we do bonding, but there's some who are advocating for doing 2 large bonding bills in the biennium, one each year instead of just one every 2 years. And I do think that would be justified in part because of things like how far we've fallen behind in the area of housing and making sure that we have adequate housing for people in our greater Minnesota communities. I do think another issue that needs to be addressed and that we are trying to address, all 3 of us have worked on issues pertaining to regulations and trying to reduce some of the regulatory burdens that increase the cost of housing and prevent the housing that we need from being developed. Some of the things we've addressed right here in Moorhead involve the sprinkler requirement, which again significantly increases the cost of housing. Representative Lean and I worked on legislation that would that removed the sprinkler requirement from twin homes, and the fact is that requirement was not leading to just to safer twin homes. It was pushing twin homes over to the Fargo side for development. So they were still being built without the sprinklers, but they were just being built over on the Fargo side. And we need to recognize that Fargo Moorhead really operates as one community, and that we need to have a level playing field on the Moorhead side. But larger than that, we need statewide to be addressing these issues of housing costs on the regulatory side. I do think our state has a tendency to go too far and do more than what's necessary or justified.
Okay. Representative Lean, do you have any additional remarks on that?
Yeah, well, I've always been a strong proponent of housing and always been a strong proponent of bonding bills because we have that big housing infrastructure piece in there. I mean, it's just, if people don't have an address to put down on job applications or a place to cook meals or, a place to administer and store medications, I mean, it really all starts at home with having that stable, safe housing for people. So I think that's something that the state has done a good job on and really needs to keep doing a good job on, because the issue is not going away. The problem is not going away. And one other piece to that, we do have a program in Minnesota that's in the House Education Bill. It's called Homework Starts at Home, and so it's really housing support dollars targeted to youth who don't have those supportive, stable housing systems set up. So I think that's a really good policy, really good use of state dollars to really target that housing piece toward students and toward families, to make sure that people with kids are, have that basic need met.
So, well, that's a crucial issue, and I want to kind of look at it from 2 points here. One is to make those who are in homes to make it more affordable, but also those who do not have homes to get into affordable housing, and part of it's also the workforce housing. You've got, in rural Minnesota, businesses have need for employees but can't find the housing for employees. So, what we've done to try to make housing more affordable for people in homes just this year is increasing the homestead credit state refund and the renter's credit by $45 million, which is significant. Basically saying that if your property taxes are high in comparison to your income, you will get a pretty good rebate there, a refund. And Minnesota probably has the most robust program in the nation when it comes to that, to help buy down property taxes. On the other side of things, that create more affordable housing for folks, so they're not paying over 30% of their income in housing. I know the base funding this year, which we're going to fund to the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, is about $131 million over the biennium. In the House proposal, we increased that by $26 million, which is about a 20% increase. And in the bonding bill, there's $30 million for rehabilitation of housing. And I think in the governor, he's got some money also. So, I mean, it's a huge issue. Are we spending enough on it? Absolutely not. But, hopefully this year, through making it more affordable for people who are in homes and finding ways to create more affordable housing, I think we're taking that approach this year.
Okay, very good, thank you. Here's another question, and this one has to do with the proposed tax increase on gas fuel. The question is the proposed gas tax increase tied to an increase in business or property taxes, and can you address the pros and cons of this gas tax to Moorhead and to your districts?
Yeah. Am I first?
I
or
think
is
Ben is
Ben
first.
is first.
Ben,
Okay.
go ahead.
Well, it's not necessarily tied to property taxes. I mean, I suppose it could be if the state did not support transportation, at the state level. Then it's going to come down to the local governments, where local governments are going to have to maintain roads and bridges. So that's going to fall on the property taxes. But the gas tax itself, I mean, that's not necessarily directly tied to business taxes or property taxes. And I mean, really, the gas tax is a pretty good deal for people in greater Minnesota. Farm fuels are exempt from the gas tax. We get a bigger percentage in greater Minnesota compared to what we pay in on the gas tax. And in all borders communities, not just Moorhead, compared to Fargo or other communities on the Minnesota-North Dakota border, but all border communities, so we're talking Wisconsin, Iowa. For any gas station that's 7.5 miles from a gas station in the neighboring state, where that neighboring state's gas tax is 3 cents or more lower, essentially the state comes in and pays the difference to the distributor. And I've been looking into this issue quite a bit, talking with some folks who run service stations, talking with the Department of Revenue and the Department of Commerce. And it sounds like we'll be okay in Moorhead, at least, if there is a gas tax increase, because North Dakota is already about 4 cents lower than Minnesota. So we're already getting the benefit of that state credit or the state refund right now. It's 1 penny right now. Now, if we go up to 10 cents or 20 cents or whatever, it's going to be more of a cost to the state, but that's, a very big benefit for us here on the border with North Dakota. So, really taking a look at how we develop new revenue for transportation. We're looking at the general fund, the gas tax, and some of those things. I mean, really, the gas tax, it's a winner for us in Moorhead especially, but all of greater Minnesota, really.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Well, as Representative Lean had said, the costs are about $600 million a year for the next 10 years to just keep up with the infrastructure, just maintenance. And Democrats, Republicans, Independents, we all agree on that. So it is then, how do you pay for it? And so you can pay for it through a user fee, which is basically the gas tax, or you can take it out of the general fund, or maybe a little bit of both. But when you take it out of the general fund, which some proponents want to do, you now all of a sudden are competing with education and health and human services, nursing homes and local government aid and all of these other things. And if you're doing really well and you have surpluses, you might be able to do that for a while, but it takes money out of those areas. The user fee on the gas tax is dedicated. Back in 1956, your parents and grandparents went and voted overwhelmingly to place in our Constitution this highway user tax distribution fund that says that these dollars are dedicated, they're permanent, and they can only go for roads and bridges. And as Ben mentioned, even though we pay about 53% of the gas tax, because we probably travel a little bit more on the average, but we get back 68% of those dollars because of the formula that really benefits rural Minnesota. And so it's never easy to raise taxes. A gas tax has never been very popular, but I will tell you that in January, when I started going to the cities this year, I think it was $2 a gallon. Today I got gas at $2.69.9. 69 cents increase in 3.5 months? And not 1 penny of that 69-cent increase went to repair our roads. They went back to oil companies and goodness knows who else, but not the roads. And in fact, on Monday, we were getting questions on this. It was 2:55. This was at 8 o'clock when I went by Casey's on Highway 10. By the time we were having our meeting in Dilworth at 2:30, someone says, well, it's 2.64. Now, it had gone up, just Kent and I talking about the gas tax sent it up 9 cents that day. So, I mean, you know, where's the outrage on that? And what we're looking at would be, and it's not going to be 20 cents. It's not going to be that. But I do think a dime would be reasonable. And it would be pay as you go. It's a user fee, and it goes for roads and bridges. And I'll let Kent finish off on whatever there might be.
Oh, yeah, Representative Lean and Marquardt covered it quite well. But I do think it's important to note, you mentioned the 20 cents that the governor's proposing, and that's in the House side. I think it's really done to draw attention to the magnitude of the problem. I don't think the governor is expecting to get anywhere near the 20 cents, you know, maybe a nickel, maybe a dime, but he wants it to be known that the needs are great, that $6 billion over the next 10 years, as Representative Marquardt said, that's the most conservative estimate. That's the estimate that even the most conservative elected officials agree to. So everybody agrees that we need to do something. It's just a matter of how to do it. There's really kind of three major options which have already been discussed here. One is take it out of the general fund, which means taking it from our schools and our nursing homes, pitting people against our roads and bridges. And we just lost our nursing home in Twin Valley. And I can tell you that was a devastating blow to our community. It's not just a place to care for our seniors and our loved ones, but it's also a place of employment. One of the biggest employers, was the biggest employer next to our school in the community. And so the trickle effect, the ripple effect that it has on our community is tremendous. And I can tell you that the whole business community, our school, everybody's concerned about what the impact is going to be on our larger community. And so I don't want to be taking money away from those vitally important places for our communities. The other option is raising our property taxes. Again, something that hits rural Minnesota especially hard. It's regressive, the most regressive tax there is, hitting our areas much harder than others. So I don't want to go down that route either. So when you look at those three options, the gas tax user fee, which is a user fee, property taxes, or taking it from our schools and nursing homes, there's no question which is the best way. The gas tax user fee does much less harm to our communities, and actually very beneficial because it works through that formula that sends more money back to us than what we pay in. In other words, we're leveraging money from the Twin Cities to put into our roads and bridges out here, lowering our costs. How can we argue against that? That's a good deal. And believe me, the people in the metropolitan area, they're not very fond of the gas tax user fee because they know they're sending their money out to us to put into our roads and bridges. And then when you add on top of that, as Representative Lean said, farm fuel is exempt, and Moorhead and Dilworth are completely exempt because they fall within that 7.5 mile radius for protection. In other words, Moorhead and Dilworth, we get all the benefits here, but don't have to pay any of the costs. That's a pretty good, darn good deal for our area. I think for all of those reasons, the gas tax user fee is far superior. And I think it's also important to note that if we had a 10-cent gas tax user fee increase, that doesn't necessarily translate into a 10-cent increase at the pumps. We know that because we see states that have dramatically different gas taxes, but we don't see those dramatic differences in the prices. So in other words, some of that 10 cents would be coming out of the profit margins of the big gas companies. And I would favor doing that because the profit margins are pretty good, and we'd like to see some of that go into our communities.
Thank you. I appreciate the detailed explanation you all gave. I was firsthand experienced that. I drove through Lake Park, I think it was, and it was 2:55, and on my way back it was 2:64, and it was like, that was just an hour. So I can appreciate that. All right, we do have another couple of questions here that go in different directions. This one is, the question is, what is the status of the End-of-Life Option Act from a month ago? Do you foresee any progress towards legalizing physician-assisted suicide in Minnesota in the future? And he adds that this passed week in New Jersey, and it was rejected in Maryland, Connecticut, and Arkansas. Any thoughts on that?
I have not seen any movement. I would not expect that to pass this year. I don't know if it's in any of the bills, yeah,
Okay, something that just came
Yeah.
up for discussion.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right,
nothing in the Senate.
yeah, okay,
Yeah.
very good. All right, this might be a little bit more something that you've talked about or certainly dealt with. Is there anything coming from this session to further combat drug abuse, opioid abuse in Minnesota?
Yes, in fact, we've passed a bill off the House floor, and I think was it passed off the Senate floor too, I think.
Yep, it's in conference.
It's in
committee.
conference committee, and I know the House bill had looked at in several ways. Education, kind of enforcement, setting up this task force that would really look at best on how to deal with folks and all sorts of prevention and so forth. And they pay for it by, I think it's $20 million, by taxing the opioid manufacturers. There's a certain registration fee. I mean, they've been the ones that really haven't taken any responsibility in all of this. And so we bring them to the table and say, you've had a responsibility. You really have just done nothing at this point. You're going to help us combat this situation. So that's kind of, maybe Ben can add more on the House bill, but that's,
Sure.
so we're gonna get something done this year on that. That's really gonna address this really
That's good
awful
news.
problem
Okay.
we're having.
Any other comments, please
Yeah.
jump in.
Yeah, I could probably mention the differences between the House and the Senate version. The reason it went to conference committee, both bills have the $20 million, and it's through, raising the fees on the pharmaceutical or the drug companies that produce the opioids. There is a difference, though, in what happens if there is a lawsuit against the opioid manufacturers right now. And the lawsuit is in regard to how they've been targeting certain communities that are most likely to abuse the opioids with an oversupply of these opioids and marketing strategies and techniques they're using to try to increase the usage of opioids and the addiction to opioids. And there was a lawsuit, I believe it was in the state of Oklahoma, that did prevail, where it was a judgment of $270 million, I think, against these drug manufacturers because of some of these tactics that they were using. And there's a similar case pending here. And what the Senate bill says is that if there is a judgment against the opioid manufacturers, that $20 million in fees would go away then because we're getting money from the lawsuit. Whereas in the House, they say, no, we're going to keep on with the $20 million. And I think that the House has the right strategy here because that $20 million is meant to address the ongoing problems in the future, whereas that $270 million judgment, for instance, against them, that was for reparations for what they had done in the past, for damage that they've already done. So I think that we should be continuing with the $20 million in fees. And believe me, we're not talking about a significant amount for the opioid manufacturers. They're making profits that are far, far in excess of this fee increase that they're going to experience. So I hope it comes back, that it's the House version that prevails in this. But we need to do something about this. These are highly addictive drugs that are so destructive to our communities, and some of the tragic stories we heard of all those who had lost loved ones because of the addictions. And another thing that we're trying to address is doctors prescribing opioids and setting some standards where we're trying to reduce the amount of prescriptions to opioids because, if at all possible, we should be using other types of drugs because it's oftentimes a prescription can lead to addiction. And that's, in most cases, the way it starts out.
Right.
So, yeah.
Very quickly, yes. Go ahead.
I don't have a lot to add on that. I mean, I'm certainly very supportive of the House position on this, that the increased registration fees and licensing fees be levied against the opioid companies. I just think that, to be frank, they're a big part of the problem, and the overprescription and the promotion of opiates by the manufacturers, promoting them to doctors and everything like that back in the early 2000s and 90s, I think really has led to the problems that we have right now. So I would continue to support that House position.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any thoughts or remarks or information at all about the cost of some of the more common drugs that people depend upon, like insulin, for example? Is there anything, Kent?
Yeah, I guess and actually I was thinking about that as I was talking about the opioids, because it is connected. The pharmaceutical companies that produce the insulin have, the costs have soared, over the last decade or more. It's been tripled. And the reason isn't because of the increasing cost of production as much as it's just the monopolistic control of these drug markets. And there's only, I'm trying to think, it's 3 manufacturers, major manufacturers of the insulin, and they can artificially hold the price much higher than the actual cost of production, because they have the power to do so, and they're able to squeeze out competition because of something known as evergreening patents. These are patents that never expire. They're supposed to expire. I mean, patents, the purpose of patents is to stimulate more innovation and development of drugs and things like that by giving a protection for a certain number of years. But then that protection is supposed to expire to open it up to competition. Well, what the drug companies will do is they'll change the name or change a little bit in the drug and then repatent it under a different name and just keep the patent going indefinitely, so it never expires and you never have competition, and they can crank up the costs as high as they want. And unfortunately, there have been many people who have died because they've rationed their insulin, because they can't afford the full insulin that they need. And there's one, I think it was Alex Smith was his name, was a young man who died because of rationing his insulin. He turned 26 years old and he was dropped off of his parents' insurance. And he was working, he was at a job that I think was making about $35,000 a year, but that $35,000 a year didn't come close to covering the costs of his insulin that were like $1,500 a month. So he started rationing the insulin and he died. And that's the ultimate cost. And there's all kinds of other health problems that people can have, including blindness and things of that nature if they ration the insulin. So we need to do something, and there is a bill that's named after this young man that is designed to provide emergency provisions of insulin to people who need it but can't afford it. And this is a life-saving bill, I believe.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Ben.
One other piece to that the House has proposed and put in the Health and Human Services bill is a plan that would essentially combine right now all the state-based healthcare programs like Minnesota Care, medical assistance, to combine those programs and then allow the state to directly negotiate with pharmaceutical companies on the reimbursements for these things. So essentially cutting out the third-party pharmacy benefit manager for these types of programs to have direct negotiating with the state and the pharmaceutical companies. And so, I mean, that's certainly something I support. I think that's a step in the right direction, a big step in the right direction. And then we're also looking at the possibility of, once we can get this worked out, we'll see what the cost-benefit analysis is, but then possibly extending that to other state-based programs for like state employees, for example, and then possibly letting other people buy into this sort of program. So it's something else the state's doing to address the cost of prescriptions.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add?
No, they
Okay.
have done excellent.
Thank you. Thank you. Definitely a problem that is facing many families. Some of you may have noticed the red shirts up in the front here. Members of Moms Demand Action, they have for Gun Sense in America. I have a couple of questions here, and I'm going to read these, both of these, and I'll let you all take some time to respond. What are the chances of the red flag law passing in the Senate as part of the omnibus public safety bill? And will you, each of you, support it? And also, will you support gun safety legislation requiring criminal background checks at gun shows and online sales of firearms? I think maybe if you could offer a little explanation of the red flag law to what that means in your response, it might be helpful for the audience that's watching online as well. And I can't remember who starts now, so Ben, you start.
Sure, I
Thank
can
you.
start on this one. Well, I can't, say to what the Senate may or may not do on the public safety bill. The House has put both the universal background check bill and the red flag bill into the omnibus public safety bill. And the red flag bill is basically policy that would say if somebody is a threat to themselves or others, that, and they own firearms and everything, that law enforcement can petition a judge to go in and temporarily confiscate or temporarily take these firearms for a period of up to 2 weeks. And so, I'm going to support the public safety bill. There are a lot of other things in there that we have to take care of, namely officer safety at our correctional facilities, namely officer safety at the facilities in St. Peter and Moose Lake. We're hearing tragedies about officers dying and just the danger that they're putting themselves into just by getting up and going to work every day. So we need to fund a lot of very important things, and so I do plan to support the overall public safety bill. I do have some concerns about these bills with the red flag bill, namely that for people who may have their firearms temporarily taken, that they would have to pay for the storage costs and things like that, whether it's the FFL dealer who's holding the arms or the law enforcement who's holding the arms. I have some concerns about that. And with the background check bill, I do have some concerns that the way the bill is written right now, I support the overall notion that people have background checks done for firearm purchases, and I support the notion that it's done through a permit to purchase, that the onus of the background check is on the person who wants to purchase the firearm, not necessarily the entity who's going to sell the firearm. So I do appreciate that, and I do support that. The only concern I have with that background check bill is right now, if somebody has a permit to carry, that would not be considered as a permit to purchase for private party sales, for things like those online sales, or you go to a gun show and somebody just has their private collection, not like a federally licensed firearms dealer. So I do have some concerns about it, and I've been talking with the bill authors about these, trying to work out some of these concerns, but I just think that the overall importance of the public safety bill is something we have to be looking at.
A normal person doesn't walk into a school and shoot children. A normal person doesn't walk into the Mall of America and throw a 5-year-old over the balcony. So to me, that's where it really has to begin, is that, and I don't know if either House File 8 or 9, the two bills we're talking about, really gets to that. I mean, even on some of the shooting we've had lately, the person wasn't supposed to have a gun, still got a hold of a gun. And my concern is that when you're talking about protections under amendments, that we've got to be pretty darn sure that it's really going to make a difference if you're going to be restricting people's rights. And I just think you deal with the mental illness part of things, and that's where I think the focus has to be. And I'm just not convinced that either one of the bills that are being put forward is going to really make a difference. So I'm not planning to support the public safety bill, and so just because of that, I just think you're restricting rights without a real sure evidence that it's going to solve the problem.
And as far as in the Senate, I don't think that those bills are even going to come up for a vote. I know leadership is opposed to bringing it to the floor for a vote. So I don't think they're going to pass, and I would agree with Representative Marquardt as far as the impact that it would have. There is a huge black market out there right now for guns. The guns are easily accessible, whether you get them legally or not. I think that what we need to be focusing on is the mental health issues, as Representative Marquardt had said, which is really gone to the root cause of some of the problems that we're experiencing here. And we do support more funding for mental health programs and efforts, especially identifying mental health issues early on in school, and have teachers trained and looking out for these issues, and having the counselors necessary to address these problems. We in Minnesota do rank near the bottom when it comes to the counselors to students ratio. We need more mental health counselors in our schools. And the sooner we identify these issues and the sooner we start to address them, the better the prognosis for success in the future. So I really think that we need to be using our resources and focusing our efforts where it's going to have the greatest impact. I think that's where it is. I have concerns about these bills myself, and for that reason think again that we should be focusing on the root causes of these problems.
Thank you. Those are very thoughtful remarks and certainly a perplexing problem that we all need to find a way to solve. This question, there are several parts to it, so I'm going to read all of it and let you ramble through as best you can. Do you foresee the transfer station funding and the 11th Street underpass funding for Moorhead? Do you foresee any increase in funds for libraries? And is there any chance that the formula funding will change? And I think we'll start with you,
I'm going to
Representative
give
Marquardt.
on all three of them a definite maybe. So, well, just because they're all in the House bonding bill, but and we've got former Senator Stump here, who was the chair of the Senate Capital Investment Committee, so he knows how this all plays out. But this is typically not a bonding year, and so the House bill is $1.5 billion, and even back in Senator Stump's, that's a pretty big bonding bill, even in a bonding year. And so, I mean, and I totally support that. I mean, you know, the contractors are hungry, interest rates are low, and these go for statewide projects that benefit folks. But, you know, through the work of Representative Lean and Senator Eakin, you know, the funding now is for the 21st. We have for the 21st in Moorhead. And unbelievably, both in the governor's plan and the House plan, there's what, $52 million for 11th Street, just like right now, right after that. And these two gentlemen right here have worked just super on that. And last year, it was right to the end, we had the transfer station. So I think there's a good shot there too. And then I know there's $9 million in the bonding bill for libraries, but that is very important that they do the formula change also, because you can't do a formula change without new money coming in, otherwise you have winners and losers. But I know Mary Murphy, who's the capital investment chair, she loves libraries. She talks about libraries all the time, and so she's got $9 million. She had $10 million, but had to reduce it. I was in her office when she was lamenting. She had to, something new came and had to give $1 million somewhere. She said she liked that nice round number of a 10, but it went down to a 9, and she was frustrated about that. But that would be pretty significant. So if we get a big bonding bill, yes. If it gets down to 400 or 500, it gets really dicey at that point to keep projects like that in.
Right. Well, yeah, and I wish Senator Stump was still the chair of the bonding committee. He did a great job for our area out here. But I agree with Representative Marquardt. They do have a very robust bonding bill, as he already stated, in the House. In the Senate, the leadership there, the current bonding chair is saying we don't even know if we'll have a bonding bill this year. I think we will have a bonding bill. That's usually the position that they take because they want to get something in return before they give in on doing a bonding bill. But it's probably going to be smaller than what we hope for. So whether or not we can get the funding for the solid waste station, the 11th Street underpass, or the library funding and the formula change, well, we'll have to wait and see how big that bonding bill is, if it's going to be big enough to accommodate those things. Typically in a non-bonding year, we get around a $200 million bonding bill. And so it just goes to some of the more critical infrastructure, like flood mitigation, for instance, which is critically important for our area as well. But usually there's not much room for much else. So I'm hoping that because of what they did in the House, that'll put some pressure on to bring that number up. And if we can bring it up enough, we could get some of these other projects done, get some funding for 11th Street as well as solid waste, and hopefully get the library funding that we need, and the formula change, which has been for years we've been fighting to try to get the formula change, which in order to treat our rural and greater Minnesota regional libraries fairly. And as Representative Marquardt said, in order to get that done, we do need more money in the system, because we can't just change the formula without funding, because you're going to be doing some harm to somebody, and they're going to be the ones down the metro area, and they have the votes. So we have to at least hold them harmless while getting the funding we need for our regional system. That's something that we have to always be conscious of generally, is that in order to get more funding, oftentimes we have to put more funding in the system, because we can't just take it from the cities. But the solid waste station, especially this year, the solid waste facility is so critically important. Actually, the PCA commissioner under Dayton was out and looked at it and placed it at the top of their priority list when it came to solid waste facilities, because of how poor shape it was in and how badly needed it was. So that is really a top priority issue for Clay County here this year. But of course, moving forward, we need to work on more underpasses. The train traffic out here has created some real problems for us, not just as far as convenience, but as far as public safety, as far as being able to get emergency vehicles across the tracks in a timely manner when every second counts. It's often a matter of life and death. And also for our ability to thrive economically, and for businesses to thrive, we need to have those things done. And I agree with Mary Murphy about how important our libraries are, and I think we oftentimes lose sight of the important role that libraries play in our communities. And I speak from personal experience on that as a teacher, or a former high school teacher, how much I relied on our public libraries to help me out in teaching. So really, the libraries are an extension of our education system. It's the ongoing education that we all need as adults. It doesn't stop when we leave high school or leave college. We need to continue to remain engaged in learning, and libraries are a critically important part of that.
Thank you. Ben?
Well, if it were up to me, yes, let's get this done. We have the debt service capacity in the state budget over the next 2 years to do $3 billion in bonding. So, let's do it. As Representative Marquardt says, contractors want these projects and interest rates are low. And so let's get these things done. We have about $3 and $4 billion in requests every year for bonding projects around the state. And, the backlog is not going away. So as long as we have the ability to do some of these things, I really think we need to be doing these things. I have told Representative Murphy that the Clay County transfer station is #1 on my list of bonding priorities for this year, so I really want to see that one get done. And I do have to give a lot of credit to Governor Dayton for starting to put a lot of focus on these grade separation projects and just the importance of them around the state. He and now Senator Tina Smith were really crucial in getting the Moorhead project done. And so now I really commend Governor Walz's administration for continuing that focus and continuing to have the Moorhead rail crossing intersections at the top of their list as far as priorities for these types of projects, because it's, as Senator Eakins said, it's more than just the convenience of getting back and forth around town. It's public safety, it's having that crossing between the high school and MSU with no crossing arms. I mean, that's a public safety concern. So we really do need to get these projects done. So as far as I'm concerned, let's do $1.5 billion this year and $1.5 billion next year and get some good work done. And I have to say, Mr. Steen asked me about the library question yesterday at the Moorhead Business Association meeting, and he stumped me, so I went back and I took a look at it. And the funding increase, in addition, as Representative Marquardt says, some capital dollars for libraries and things, just the funding increase for the operating, that is in the House K-12 bill along with that formula change. And the formula change, it's an equalization factor that basically helps out some of the rural communities, smaller town communities who don't have that tax base where they can be able to pay for some of these amenities like libraries. So that is also in the K-12 bill.
Okay. Thank you. And I can certainly attest to the vibrant libraries as I travel through communities in Minnesota. Sometimes on weekends, the library is the hub of activity, and there's something to be very proud of in Minnesota compared to many other states. Just one last item, if I could bring up. Do you have any comments about the farm situation in Minnesota? How have the farmers been affected by tariffs and different trade practices? What are you seeing in your communities? I know, Senator Eakin, you said that the nursing home closed in Twin Valley, and that's very sad news. I didn't know that, but what are you hearing from our rural communities?
Well, it's tough. It's a difficult time for farmers. The farm economy has been in decline. So many have been struggling. We've actually been dealing with mental health issues in that regard. We do have funding in the Senate, and I believe the House does as well, to have one more mental health advocate because there is only one in the state right now. So they're spread too thin, and the demand for their services and the need for their services is increasing. And unfortunately, farmers are very independent people and typically don't talk about the problems they're having and the stress that they're under. But it's been a real problem. Suicide rates are up significantly as a result. So the problems are real. The tariff certainly has been adding to those problems. But we need to, at this time, I think, really focus efforts on trying to help the agricultural community and to, when the rest of the economy in Minnesota was not doing well, it was the ag economy that was really holding things up and was really performing quite well. And now, the rest of the economy is doing fairly well, but the ag economy is not. I think it's time that we make sure that we do what we can for the ag community. But yeah, we're trying to address one thing we've done in the ag bill to try to provide more opportunity for farmers. We are also pursuing more for the hemp production in our area. That was taken off the controlled substance list in Washington, so now it's opening up to wide-scale production. And we had already set ourselves up to be in a good position for this time because we started a pilot project in Minnesota, and I authored that bill for hemp production. We import lots of hemp from Canada, and lots of hemp-made products from Canada. And hemp can be used for making all kinds of different products. We're talking about textiles and paper and cement, insulation. It can be used for oils. And we still don't know all that it could be used for. There's still research being done. So I think that this is one thing that could offer one more commodity for our farmers and also attract more businesses to our community who would make things from that hemp. And it's important to note that hemp is not marijuana. It's related. To outlaw hemp just because it's related to marijuana would be like throwing you in jail because you look like a cousin who committed a crime or something. I just don't think that's right. And I think that when it was outlawed, it was actually quite popular back during World War II. Even 4-H clubs were doing hemp for victory projects where they were growing hemp to make rope and canvas and things that were necessary for the war effort. But after the war, it was outlawed. I think one of the reasons is because the folks in the southern states saw it as competition for textiles. And so they wanted, they came up with the fact that it was related to, looked like marijuana. But we need to do more things like that to try to open up more opportunities for our farmers. And other things that we've been working on, trying to reduce the property tax burdens that they're facing. Again, especially now with the economic stress that they're under. And that's one of the things I don't like about the property tax is that it doesn't matter if you're struggling or not, you still have to pay it. At least with the income tax, if you're struggling and you're not making income, you don't have to pay it. But the property tax, you do. So I think we can do a lot to try to relieve some of the pressure there in the property tax realm.
Thank you. Any other remarks about that topic?
Well, yeah, that's, agriculture is a huge part of our economy. And I don't know if anyone has seen the video posted by a son of a dairy farmer. Well, he's part of the Tom Berg from Pine Island, Minnesota. It's heart-wrenching.
It is.
He had just had an argument with his dad. And it was, they needed to buy some feed, but they didn't have the money, so they were kind of arguing over how many cows to sell. And it's about a 200-cow dairy farm. And he's in tears talking about this and talking about how his dad told him that he's worse off now than when he started, as far as that he had less. And talked about his mother had called Land O'Lakes to see if there's any help or whatever. They said, well, we could give you a job or something. She said, well, he said, here she gets up at 4:30 in the morning and goes till 10 at night. When does she have time to do that? But in the dairy, it's just, if you haven't had a chance to see it, I think it just really epitomizes the real difficult times that farmers are having, especially dairy farmers. But the University of Minnesota Extension Service came out with their kind of annual report a couple of weeks ago, and for the 6th year in a row, ag incomes are down, and they're down to their lowest point since the 1980s, which is not good. And so, as Kent said, we can't, as a state, control the weather. We can't control foreign trade agreements, but we can control some of the input and costs and so forth. So when you can look at property taxes, we're looking at, like on school building bonds, raising the credit from 40 to 70%. We do something called Section 179 full expensing, where you can depreciate up to $1 million, which helps initially. And we're looking at some other things to deal with that, but it's we've got to do whatever we can to help that ag economy, which is so important to our area.
Thank you. Okay, we've used up an hour very quickly. I want to thank the Rourke Art Museum for hosting us here, and for MCAM for recording this. They will put it online, I believe, so that you can rewatch this, or you can direct your friends who are not able to be here to watch this. And I especially want to thank these 3 legislators who have made themselves so available to us on every time we've asked them to be here and speak to you and answer all of our questions. And if you have closing remarks to make, we'd love to hear that. Maybe you can let everyone know how to reach you, or where your website is, or what the best way to reach you is.
Well, first of all, Mary, thank you. Thank you to League of Women Voters for the invite again. And I'm just, we're in a crucial stage of the session. And so the input is really valuable. And so you can go onto the Minnesota House website and get any of us, just either the Senate or the House, and you can click the members and get to that. Rather, I could say what it is, but you'll forget. So I'll just, that'd be the best way. But and I do have an 800 number if you want to, 1-800-551-5520. Otherwise, you can go and find the website. But thanks all for attending. And I do hope we can set a good example with a divided government and show the nation that we can actually compromise, get the work done, and create good results for Minnesotans.
Yep, and as far as, I too want to thank you again for setting this up for the League of Women Voters and those who have attended. Thank you so much. I think sometimes the greatest deficit that we face in our country isn't monetary, but a deficit in public participation and engagement in what's going on. We need more of that. So many people are dropping out. I know one of the reasons is because politics has gotten more partisan, more bitter. We are actually facing, I joined something known as the Civility Caucus in the legislature, which is bipartisan and bicameral, so Republicans, Democrats, House and Senate members. And the purpose is to try to figure out ways to turn the volume down so that people don't yell at each other so much, but listen to each other, and hopefully foster a more civil environment, which is so critically important right now. And we had a professor from the University of Minnesota that came in to speak to us, to our Civility Caucus, and he was involved in a study, was leading a study that studied the partisanship and polarization in our country. And he said that it's the worst that it's been since the late 1800s after the Civil War. He said not even the 1960s were as bad as it is now. And he said that families are breaking up over politics. People are getting divorced over politics today. And And so there's a real need for trying to encourage greater civility in our politics. And I do think Minnesota can lead the way. And there's a reason why we're called the North Star State, and it's not just because of that little chimney that we have up on the top of the state, which makes us further north than the others, at least in the contiguous 48. Now that Alaska came into the Union, they beat us by a few miles as far as being as far north. But the North Star was always the star that the mariners, the people out on the ships would follow, and that would guide them to safety and would lead the way. I think that's the reason that we're known as the Star of the North, because we do lead the way, and we have a unique opportunity. The fact that we are the only divided legislature in the nation, we have an opportunity to show Washington and the rest of the country how it can be done. And I do think that our leaders, whether Republican or Democrat, have set the right tone and are moving in that direction. So I'm hopeful. And if anybody wants to get a hold of me, you can contact me. As Paul said, my information's on the web, but you can also call my cell phone. And my cell phone number is 218-849-7848. And if you want to talk to me afterwards and get the number, feel free to do so. It's great to email me, but I really like talking to people in person. I think that that's so important and something that's been lost in politics now too. We don't have as much of that face-to-face connections, which I think also helps to foster greater civility.
Agreed. Here for civility.
Yeah.
Ben.
Thank you, Mary, for moderating tonight, and thank all of you again for coming out here and asking us the important questions on your mind. I certainly appreciate that. And one final thank you to the Rourke for hosting us, and the AV folks for making this accessible for people at home and everything. And yeah, I guess I would just echo what Representative Marquardt and Senator Eakin has said, where we're in the final crunch now, about 4 weeks left of session. So it's really important to hear from people just as far as what they value as far as what's going into the bills, and maybe what people don't value so much, what's going into the bills. So again, thank you all.
Thanks, audience.